Maybe those of you who are married can relate to this in some way.
And like she never shuts her brain off, man. She's always like buzzing. She has a hard time falling asleep, but she's always buzzing. And if I ask her something, it's like I get this myriad of answers. And then, me, it's like I can actually kind of shut my brain down, And so there's times when Kathy and I will be like, in the car driving, like, we're going somewhere, out to eat or maybe driving to a show. And, and I'm just kind of shut down. I'm just kind of, doing the drive. And all of a sudden, something hits her and she just turns and goes, "Honey, what are you thinking?" And how many of you guys know the answer? Shout it out to me. What are you thinking? Nothing. You think we're lying. I swear we're not lying. We can actually think of nothing. It's God's gift. It's called testosterone poisoning. Did you know that the chemical wash of testosterone actually kills some brain cells? It's true.
Well, we aren't necessarily keeping a secret just because we have nothing to say. But Jesus did tell us that there were times when we needed to keep our thoughts and our actions secret. We sometimes call the Ten Commandments, "Thou shalt nots." Chapter 6 of Matthew begins with some very straightforward do nots that came from Jesus. You could say that these tell us how not to practice your religion, specifically how not to give to the needy, how not to pray, and how not to fast. So let's read Matthew 6, beginning in verse 1. "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father, who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. We'll look only at the first do not today. Last week, we made a quick stop in Searcy, Arkansas, as we were on our vacation at Harding University, where I grew up and where I went to school, starting in the first grade at Harding Academy all the way through college, with the exception of my 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Brenda and I met while we were there in college and had both of our children there in Searcy and brought them home to apartments on the campus, which are now no longer there. We walked around the main campus that was there when we were students and drove around the newer buildings that had not been built yet. It's a beautiful campus, and it is about twice the size it was when we were there. One of the things that made us feel a little less like strangers when we looked at all of the new buildings is the names on some of the newer buildings. Most of the newer buildings were named for people who were our teachers and administrators. And since I grew up, some of them were my neighbors. All of the older buildings were named for people I never knew and never knew much of anything about. I feel better about the names of those I knew growing up because many of them had very little money, mainly because they worked for Harding when the school paid very little to anyone. Those families made sacrifices because they believed in what Christian education could do for young people and for the world. My brother-in-law's family was there before we moved there when I was 3 years old, and they used to say that there were times when the faculty and staff lived on love and peanut butter. That was before peanut butter cost as much as steak. But I like seeing their names on buildings, and there's even a rose garden with additional dedications to women who served in less prominent roles. It's a good thing to honor those who have gone before us as Christians, just like it is a good thing to honor those who made sacrifices to establish this country where we have freedom to pursue happiness and especially freedom to worship. But there is something that we should think about when we do that. We might actually be placing a potential stumbling block in the paths of those we might honor. Now, I actually doubt that anyone whose name is on those buildings at Harding gave money or service with the condition that their name would go on a building. But some of them might have liked the idea that it just might happen, don't you think? And it's easy to point the finger at those who do not seem to be dedicated followers of Jesus and feel pretty certain that some of them seem pretty inclined to seek honor and glory for the service they provide. Well, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, we need to remember that Jesus will later in Matthew talk about the dangers of judging others. And he does not offer exceptions to say we are free to judge politicians and free to judge rich people and to judge celebrities. We can and we should be aware of past actions and promises and make judgments as to what ideas they have and what promises they make and whether they have been able to fulfill promises in the past. But we actually do not know whether we would be better than any other person if we had lived their life and had their gifts and limitations and temptations. So we need to realize that we all have opportunities and temptations that may not seem to us to be too similar to a politician or a celebrity or a wealthy person or a college president or even a very gifted preacher or a Christian writer. What Jesus says in these verses applies to all of us at some level because we all have something to give. Not only that, we all have something to give that others would admire. That's right, you may not think so. But we should give and serve in those ways in which we have been gifted or given opportunities. In fact, it is our responsibility and even our duty to give and to serve in those ways. I'll take it one step further and add that even if it is impossible to do those things without being seen and even praised, we still need to do those things. There are two things, however, that we must not do. We must not do any good thing so that others will see us do it. And we must not do any good thing for any kind of payoff from people. Now, notice that Jesus is assuming that when we practice righteousness, he's talking about our religious actions and practices, not really our beliefs. He is assuming that we are seeking a payoff, a reward. Now, that's not bad unless the reward we are seeking is bad. It is good to seek the reward that is promised. Well, the reward that is promised by Jesus is a relationship with God that results in the biggest payoff of all, life with Him that will not end. Now, that's not usually the only reward we will receive when we follow Jesus, but it is the only one we should seek. Following Jesus usually makes for a better life in this world. Following Jesus usually makes our marriages better, our families better, our careers better, our sense of well-being better, our health better. Usually. Statistically, in fact, Christians do enjoy what most people would consider to be better, happier lives in almost every category. Maybe not quite as much as I would say should be the case, but significantly better. Here's a bit of the data from a study done by the American Bible Society. On the Human Flourishing Index as a whole, practicing Christians received an average score of 7.8, I guess out of 10, compared to 6.9 for non-practicing Christians and 6.7 for non-Christians. This phenomenon extended to the happiness and life satisfaction domain, where practicing Christians received an average score of 7.8, followed by non-practicing Christians at 6.8 and non-Christians at 6.5. When it comes to meaning and purpose, practicing Christians turned in an average score of 8.1, while non-practicing Christians and non-Christians registered average scores of 6.9 and 6.4, respectively. Okay, so again, statistically, Christians do enjoy what most people would consider to be better, happier lives in almost every category. But that is not always true. And that is not the promise that Jesus makes. And even when it is true, that is not the reason that we should follow Jesus. In Iran, for example, and in many countries, becoming a follower of Jesus does not make for an easy life at all. But Iranians, even in their country, under the current regime, should still choose Jesus. Before the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, there were only 500 who said that they were Christians in Iran. And now there are Iranian Christians like our Mina all over the world. But in Iran, where 250 Iranian Christians were arrested last year on charges of propaganda contrary to the holy religion of Iran, and who knows what they suffered after their arrest. But in Iran, even when that is going on, there are now at least 1 million Christians. One estimate I heard was 5 million. But you don't follow Jesus inside Iran to have an easier life. You certainly do not do your righteous acts in the name of Jesus to be seen. But as a faithful follower of Jesus, you still do your righteous acts, whether you are seen or not. Now, the point of doing good things in secret is not about hiding from possible persecution or being ashamed of our faith. Now, there are times when we should not be necessarily trying to hide our faith, like Jesus and the apostles and Stephen and other examples in the book of Acts, and we should do good openly in spite of what might happen to us. But the point Jesus is making is about our motives for doing good, whether we have an audience or not. God knows our motives, so even if someone else does see us and praise us, it still counts if we truly do it to bring praise to God and not to be praised by people. Listen to this story about a learning exercise at a camp where 3 very specific instructions were given to this man's daughter, and this father had to follow those instructions with her.
But one day they took the dads and the daughters deep into the woods, and we were going to do this exercise, and they blindfolded the daughters. And then they told the dads, all right, you're going to go and guide your daughter blindfolded through the woods. They said, now you're going to give your daughter 3 instructions and repeat them as many times as you can before the walk begins. And the instructions were, I will never leave you. You can ask me anything, and you should only listen for the sound of my voice. And I would make her repeat those back to me. And I said, are we good? She said, I'm good. And then we were instructed to begin our hike through the woods. And it was easy to guide her in the beginning because I could have a hand on her shoulder and we could walk and talk with each other. And I'd say, okay, there's a rock coming up, turn to your right, this kind of thing. And then with a silent signal from a camp counselor, they would tell me I had to remove my hand. And I could only guide her with the sound of my voice. And it got a little more challenging to navigate the path. Then with another silent signal from the camp counselor, I could no longer speak unless she remembered the instructions that she could ask me anything. So as you can imagine, we started to get off track in our hike. It's becoming more and more challenging. Counselor comes up as like a voice of deception, and my daughter's feeling lost and wondering where I am because she's not hearing my voice and she's not remembering to ask me any questions. Counselor comes up and says, hey, Lulu, it looks like you've gotten separated from your dad in the group. And she said, yeah, I'm not sure where he is. And she said, well, how about you follow me and I'll get you caught up with the group. And of course, as a dad, I'm overanalyzing my entire job as a parent, praying that she says, no, I'm only supposed to follow my dad. And then all of a sudden I heard, okay. She follows the camp counselor. Well, what does the counselor do? Doesn't catch her up with the group. The counselor walks her into a ditch and she doesn't realize it, but she's blindfolded in a ditch standing in front of a tree. And I'm standing there helpless, waiting and hoping that she remembers the instructions. After several minutes, I'm just standing there. The counselor comes over to Lulu and says, hey, Lulu, I don't think you're where you're supposed to be. Do you? She said, no. The voices had all quieted. The group had gone away. And she said, well, do you remember the instructions that you were given? She's like, I think so. And she thought for a couple minutes, and I'm standing there waiting. And all of a sudden I hear 4 words, Dad, are you there? And I stood there in the woods just crying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm here. Yeah. And she said, can you help me? And I said, yeah. And we got back on track and we walked back and we had this incredible moment. I thought about those 3 instructions and how many times I've forgotten them in my life, that he will never leave me. I can ask him anything and I should only listen to the sound of his voice. Coming back to those 3 principles and remembering that I have a God who's always with me, that he loves to hear the sound of his children's voice, and that he is the only source of strength and guidance in my life that I should really trust.
Now, there are times when God speaks through other people, which I hope he is doing now through me and through all of us. The church is a gift of God, but it's not to listen to the teachings of the church or anyone in the church. It is to help us listen to his voice. We should never think we don't need other people. The number of people who are attempting to follow Jesus today without connecting to a church family is a growing number, and that is not good. We need to be a part of a church. But let's be clear, our goal is not to be good church members. Our goal is to listen to God's voice and look to him for our guidance without being concerned about how others see us or whether others see us. That little exercise that the father and daughter went through is a reminder that even if no one else cares, or maybe even if they're trying to lead us in the wrong direction like the counselor did, God is still there, wanting us to call out to him. He wants to hear our voice, and no matter what anyone else thinks of it, he loves the sound of our voice. We had a friend in Santa Clarita who was a school teacher. And at first I just found her voice very unpleasant and even a bit annoying. I thought she might have been in the wrong profession. But as we got to know her and saw what a sweet person she was, her voice became very secondary to her as a person. She had a firefighter husband who fit the stereotypes of hunkiness, the kind of guy who might be asked to be a model for a firefighter calendar. But he wasn't shallow. He saw the goodness in her, and her squeaky nasal voice probably sounded good to him. Well, our physical voices are not the only things that might annoy others, or at least might not be pleasant to them. But God's affection for us as his children sees and hears everything about us through different eyes and ears. So we can have this special parent-child relationship with God that will be rewarding in ways that people will never reward us. People might see our good works and might even acknowledge them as good, but they don't have to reward us beyond that. And they might even start looking for ways to undermine us and reveal our imperfections. If we look to people for our happiness and security, we are going to be hurt at some point, likely in many ways. So where do people correctly fit in the pursuit of happiness? We do not view people as potential sources of satisfaction. We view people as opportunities to share God's love. That is why we give, and that is why we do other good works.